you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I love to see standing room only. My name is Lesley Silverman. I'm the head of future media at United Talent Agency, one of the big 3 talent agencies in LA. And my work sits at the intersection of art, entertainment, and emerging technology, which is why I'm so thrilled to be moderating this session this afternoon. I just want to say it's my first ever time at FOG. Thank you to Susan and Abby for organizing this talk. And thank you to my esteemed panelists, who I'm going to introduce now. So starting with Trevor, the artist. Trevor Paglen is a MacArthur genius whose practice investigates the systems, infrastructures, and hidden architectures that define contemporary life. His work exposes what usually remains invisible and pushes us to confront the politics embedded in our technologies. I also want to say Trevor has a book coming out that he would like to just share before we get into our talk so we don't forget, and also visit his work, which is on view at Jessica Silverman Gallery's booth. Okay, you want to talk about your book for a second, and then I'll introduce Brandon? No, please. No, go ahead. Please. Come on. Okay. He says no, but he has a forthcoming book, so pay attention to everywhere where you can follow Trevor. Okay. Brandon John Harrington. Brandon leads talent acquisition for Google DeepMind, a place that we would love to know more about the inner workings of, focusing on the interplay between culture, creativity, and frontier technologies. But he deeply, deeply understands this art world because he is a collector, and I'm really excited to talk to these 2 gentlemen today. So many of you may already be experiencing AI tools in your everyday life, and some of you may not even know what a large language model is. Actually, how many of you don't know what a large language model is? Okay, just a few. This is the San Francisco crowd. That's okay. At its simplest, AI tools learn patterns from massive amounts of human-made material and generate new text, new images, new sound, and new ideas. But today isn't really about the underpinnings of how the technology works. It's about how it feels to encounter it as a creator and as a technologist. All right, so let's jump in. When you both think about the relationship between art and AI right now, what springs to mind first? I'll start with you, Trevor.
Oh my God, you just opened up a giant... Okay. Relationship between art and AI. I guess very broadly, I would put that in 2 categories. On one hand, we can talk about the art that we're doing here, the world of people like me who make art and put it in galleries and ideally museums and exhibitions and that sort of thing. So we have that clump here, and then we have another clump here, which is just like visual culture, like what images are being made that we see every day. What does our visual landscapes look like? What is our relationship to images? The implications for those 2 things are quite different, although overlapping. And in order to not be running my mouth for an hour, we can kind of stop there and we can kind of probe those areas.
Great. How about you? What comes to mind first?
I think there's a fixation on the final JPEG of AI and art, of this like... I think when I talk to my peers about it, it's very much like, what is the model creating, and not what AI can do for the art ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah. Okay, and we're gonna get more into that in a little bit. But Trevor, for you, we talked about how your practice exposes invisible systems. So what's the most misunderstood or opaque part of AI right now?
I think the thing that I'm thinking about a lot now is how interacting with AIs affects your subjectivity. In other words, how it is affecting you psychologically in ways that you may or may not notice. So for example, when there was the OpenAI chatbot that was famously very solicitous, and I was like prompting it, and it was like, "Oh, you're so smart." And I was like, "Oh, that feels really good." But then I realized that, like, something very insidious is going on here, right? That the logic of the LLM is sort of being flavored with a kind of sycophancy and a kind of narcissistic-inducing kind of
people
layer.
pleaser.
It's a people pleaser, right? And I was trying to think about, well, that is probably not good, if you generalize that to society, because one of the things that is helpful to us is when people tell us we're full of shit, right?
Criticism, yeah.
Criticism, people tell us we're being immature, what have you. And that's just one example. I think there's a lot of different examples of that. And so when I think about what is misunderstood about AI, I don't think about that as like a technical question so much as that there's a layer of, there's a cognitive thing happening that people are starting to study, and then things are starting to come out about that. But I think that might end up being a much bigger deal than we imagine it is now. I think a lot about, if we rewound the clock 25 years and we knew what social media was going to become, there's a good chance we would have made very, very different decisions about things like online privacy and data collection and, recommendation algorithms or what have you. And I'm trying to think forward and be like, what are the things that we're just sort of like YOLOing ourselves into that we might regret?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you about that sort of ethical push point in a little bit, so keep that one top of mind. We talked a bit when we first met about vibe coding. Vibe coding. What is it? How do you use it? Do you use it?
Yes. I actually use it for two very personal reasons. So as a collector, I get a shit ton of PDFs sent to me ahead of fairs. And so I actually wrote, I do not know how to code. I do not come from a coding background. I learned via Gemini how to vibe code, that I wrote an entire script that I put into AppScript that tied to my personal Gmail that sends me a daily art digest email that literally tells me what emails were sent directly to me, which emails were mail merged to me, and which I can actually delete. So I have that version of it. And then I also am the board chair of a theater in Chicago, and I am constantly missing emails of like things I need to do for that theater. So I also have a second one that it essentially sends me a bi-weekly recap of all of my theatrical action items that I need to do, and it actually broke. I think it broke the day that we were talking. So I had to go back into Gemini, figure out what was wrong with it, rewrite the code, put it back into AppScript. So I think it has also like given me an opportunity to like really play around and figure out like what can I do with these AI systems, and like how can I help myself become more efficient and kind of remove some of the administrative burden that like at the end of a workday I don't want to really do. Which has been like a very interesting thing to explore, as like that, and then like building agents on the side as well, both for like work purposes and personal life purposes. Like also like as someone who grew up playing with Legos, it's almost like playing with building blocks again, but in a very like technical way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I really understand this theme of like efficiency, kind of freeing you up to do the more creative work that your brain doesn't need to be taxed by what it is that you're
I need
doing.
that script from you.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of people here do, so.
It was just me talking to Gemini for like 3 hours.
So I understand that, Trevor, you've worked with Google a bit in the past, as, I don't know if this is the official term, but as an artist in residence, and created a work for the Google campus. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like working with a big tech company?
Yeah, a lot of vibe coding. No, it was really interesting. And speaking of what you were saying, like there is, we use a lot of AI tools in the studio, and we use them, but for ways that maybe other studios don't. Like we don't prompt images and stuff like that. With what we're using them for is to take very technical like research documents and try to translate them into something that we can understand. We do a lot of software development, especially software development where you kind of understand the problem that you want to solve. And like that's really important. For example, the other day we had all this data from a functional MRI machine that we'd collected, and then I was trying to figure out how to map that onto the space of this model. And so it's a very complex kind of software translation that needs to happen, and then you want to be able to explore that space. And I was able to build that by myself. Now, 5 years ago, this would have been 6 months easy, of work to figure that out. And like, we did it like 2 or 3 days, right? One of the things with vibe coding that's really interesting and I think about a lot is I have a sense of what I'm doing for the most part, right? And so so I've been thinking about pilots, like planes kind of fly themselves at this point, but you have these highly trained pilots to be able to deal with novel situations, who are kind of knows what the aircraft can do, what it can't do, and you kind of want to have that pilot there, right? And so in terms of projecting forward, I'm wondering what things like expertise turn into when it is possible to develop things but actually not know exactly how it works. And again, thinking about this like cognitive scaffolding that we all use that may or may not be changing in different ways. In terms of the Google project itself, it was another example of being able to be enormously more productive than would have been able to in the past. Like, if we'd tried that project 15 years ago, the budget would have been 5 to 10 times more, and just saved so much time being able to use a lot of the Gemini tools to build that.
That's massive. So not
It's
just
massive.
efficiency, but also cost savings. The ability to create something, have a creative output that's bigger and more expensive than you ever could.
And to be able to explore a much larger space, a much larger research space, because you can do that much more efficiently, right? So you can try out a lot more ideas that are going to fail. You can try them out more because the cost of failure is much lower.
I'm going to ask you, Brandon, a little bit about your role at DeepMind. What do you do, and how does it tie into all of this, other than obviously you're an expert at clearing out your inbox?
It's true. My boss is also in the back, so I'm going to have to she will be able to check me on what I share with you, because obviously I'm here as art collector Brandon, and then DeepMind Brandon happens to be also on this stage. No, during the day, my team hires essentially the tech non-research teams at Google DeepMind. So
The brightest people.
So some of the brightest people in the entire world, some of the most interesting people I've ever interacted with, some of the people who have like really tested how I show up for work and how I think through things, because essentially it's like working for a startup. And it's allowed me to really think about like, ultimately, like these people are building the models. We want to have the most diverse, the most interesting, the most expansive teams building these models, because ultimately what they are putting into the model is what is being outputted. And if we only have the same types of people building the model, it's going to look the same. There's going to be no diversity in what it's outputting. So thinking a lot about who are we bringing in? What types of people are we hiring? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from different types of backgrounds? Are they, where they got their PhD, where they got their training, like all those kind of things that build together this like beautiful ecosystem of people who are ultimately having a tangible impact on the models that we interact with on a daily basis.
So it sounds like it's an art, not a science.
It is very much an art, not a science.
Can I ask a follow-up to that, which is that have you seen has the ability to make generative text with AI affected your hiring process, or are you it sounds like you might be working at a high enough level where you know who people
Are you
are
asking
and their
if he's
backgrounds.
getting machine-generated resumes?
I get so many machine-generated essays.
Yeah.
That's insane.
What can I say? Yes, we use AI as part of our process to better understand how we can operate more efficiently.
Great. That didn't answer the question, but I like
know.
it. Okay. Sounds great. We'll steer off of this subject for now.
Well, but just at a very high level, has that process of hiring changed when you know that you don't know where necessarily this essay is coming from? Or
It's definitely changed how we assess engineers as part of the process, because ultimately they need to know how to utilize AI as part of their coding practice, which is happening across the industry at this point anyway. Different companies are actually using vibe coding as part of their process because they're trying to test out, what exactly are these engineers able to do? And then at the same time, kind of your pilot analogy, they may be able to vibe code, but can they actually look at the code, read the code, and understand what it's creating?
Yeah, I feel, not that I'm, here as the voice of optimism here, but there's also this opportunity then for individuals who have these new skill sets that are, trained on machine generation, who might have access to a career that they didn't have access to before.
Correct.
Very cool. Okay, so this kind of touches on this, but we're in an era of human-machine collaboration. I think we know that. What future do each of you hope for, and what future do you fear?
I hope for a future where AI becomes ubiquitous, almost like electricity or Wi-Fi, that it's around us, we utilize it, but it is not this like big scary thing that people fear, that it's just something that we interact with like a chatbot on a daily basis. My fear is that it will create a like mediocre art, to be honest with you, whether that's visual art, whether that's entertainment, whether that's like just a lot of sludge on the like that we interact with, almost like I think you talked a lot about this when we had our pre-call around like, why are we so fascinated by like these videos of people eating spaghetti or like these things that we watch on TikTok that like have no storytelling element, and that we are losing our way as a society because we're trying to numb our brains. So that is what keeps me up at night, is like, is this just going to create mediocrity and people who lack critical thinking skills?
Yeah, this is, by the way, the part of our pre-talk that has had me thinking for the past several days too. Just, what are we training our brains to do? Okay, what are you optimistic about, and what do you fear?
Okay, well, there's two categories of that. One is just like the world in general, and then one is the world of images and visuality. So in terms of the world in general, I'm optimistic about people being able to do much more creative stuff. And I don't mean necessarily like prompt an image. I mean like things like trying to solve novel problems, develop tools for themselves to be able to, sort your email or work on brain data or whatever it is. And so there could be an enormous amount of creativity that is unleashed by bringing the cost down of building things and doing different kinds of experiments. So that's a hopeful thing. On the things
translating MRI data into something beautiful or something thought-provoking.
Or just even be able to process it, without spending $60,000 on an engineer.
Fair enough.
So that's in the hopeful category. In the things I worry about category. In this conversation, we're so talking about AI as language models. We're talking about generative AI, but there's many, many different kinds of AI out there. One of the things that I worry about is the ability for large companies to extract value from smaller and smaller parts of our everyday lives. For example, in the 1950s, your insurance company could have hired somebody to live in your house and look at everything that you ate and measure how much you slept and how much you drank and report that to the insurance company. That would have been preposterously inefficient to do, right? So nobody did it. But you can do that now, right? And so this whole that space of the home, of the kitchen, of the bed where you sleep, these have become places that value can be extracted from, where corporations can make money. You can do the same thing. You can think about that in the labor force. You can think about all these arenas of everyday life that we don't think about as places that of capital accumulation that can be brought into that. That's one hand. I worry about a world in which there's, 5 Elon Musks, you have $1 trillion, and everybody else is totally screwed, right? That's another worry. So in thinking about the ways in which these kinds of things may wildly exacerbate an already very unequal society. So those are the fears.
Okay, great. So I want to tap back into something that you alluded to earlier, which is here we are. We kind of see what happened with social media.
Yeah.
we see how that played out in terms of our appetites, our behaviors, and maybe some of like the broad line rules that should have been in place had we known what we were building. And we're kind of sitting at another one of those frontiers, precipices. What should be some of the basic moral, ethical principles that need to be in place for us to get ahead of some of the things that you both talked about as fearful potential outcomes? This is the big question.
This is the big question. There's so many angles to it. And I'll think about it in terms of visual culture and the world of images that we were kind of talking about before. One of the things that's been really stark for me the past couple of weeks is, I've been thinking about what is the relationship between deep fakes and AI-generated imagery and kind of like Trumpy fascism? Like, what the hell world is that where like the president is like tweeting out videos of him getting in a fighter plane and dropping like shit on protesters, right? And what is the world where he's like, they're posting memes of him like putting an American flag in Greenland, right? And we're being sort of implicitly told that there's some kind of truth to these images, that we should believe in these fictions. And on the other hand, the photographs and the videos from the last few weeks from Minnesota, where we're literally seeing ICE murder people and lock 5-year-old children up, and we're being told not to believe those images, that those images aren't self-evidently true. And I don't have an answer for that, but that feels like a really weird moment, the kind of those two image worlds and how we're being told or prompted to try to interpret them.
So true. So would you advise, as maybe one of these kind of like bright line rules, that machine-generated imagery needs to be labeled? Like, we go to the grocery store, certified organic is over here.
Well, you guys are working on that kind of thing.
So we do have something called SynthID that is labeling on the back end the data on anything that is generated, at least within Gemini. I know that our competitors are doing the same thing. So I think consent is part of that, of like understanding, yes, this was AI generated. No, this wasn't AI generated. Obviously, there are going to be bad actors in the system that are going to scrape that off. I think I was reading earlier today that like if you upload something on Instagram and then download it again, it will remove that tag. So there are still like very real ways for that to like disappear very quickly. But I think it also comes down to identity. I think like part of this is like that for me is like the bright line in all of this is like you shouldn't be able to fake someone else. You should like think as an artist like you can critique it, and I think that's a very interesting way to think about a deep fake is like as a critique of what it is. But ultimately, if you are using someone's likeness to try and dupe an audience into believing that that person is doing XYZ, like I think that is very much a bright line of like you can't mess with identity.
Can I ask you a question? Because you're really involved in theater, and I think about theater as such a rich and elegant and ancient art form. And for me, when I experience the theater, I feel this thousands of years of history kind of in this particular manifestation of that. It's slow, it's not super, jumpy and this and that. And so I want to go back to the spaghetti, right? How do you, as somebody very involved in the theater, how do you think about what you do with how you think about theater versus how you think about looking at the 20-second clip of the woman shoving spaghetti in her mouth?
I also think about like the virtual world versus live.
It's true. I mean, how much time do we have for me to talk about theater? No, I think really like for me, it is almost like going to church. It is like very much a religious experience of being able to step into a theater, to forget the outside world, and collectively, I'm not going to plug them, but like SF Playhouse talks about it being an empathy gym. And I think it's this magical space where we as a collective audience, like today, can come together and like experience something that will never be repeated. It is one collective experience of us showing up, perhaps learning someone else's story, having empathy for someone else's story, having a magical experience, watching someone sing their face off, like do all these magical, crazy things in front of us, and know that that's never going to be repeated again. And I think that when I look at something like a 20-second clip versus going to the theater, for me, a 20-second clip is something I look at when I like go on the L or like go to work during the day and like numbs my mind. Whereas I view theater as escapism. That is my means of like forgetting about what is happening in the world, sitting down in a seat and like watching the orchestra swell and something happen. And I think for the friends in the audience who know me, theater for me is a very visceral experience. Like, I feel it in my bones. I like react physically to what is happening on stage. And I think there's something so beautiful and important and magical about that like, as someone who works in tech during the day and spends a lot of time thinking about art at night, like, you can exist in both of those worlds and have both of those worlds handy. And I think it's also why we have moved towards a system of like, the reality is theater has moved to like a 90-minute no intermission entity because people can't concentrate as long because they are so used to quick bits of content being fed at them. And I think it is something as a society, for me, is disheartening because I think there is so much magic that can be had, whether you walk into a gallery, whether you walk into a theater, whether you walk into a concert hall. And like, for me, it is putting your phone away. It's putting your phone away, forgetting about technology, and just being present. And I think that, for me, doesn't exist in many facets anymore. So that's a very long answer to your question about the difference between theater and the 20-second clip. But I do think it is also like, if you look at what is being produced now on the stage, it has very much changed based on what audiences are consuming now. I mean, again, if we had a lot of time, I'd talk about like basically Broadway has become a theme park and like it is all about spectacle now. And I think, unfortunately, that is what sells tickets and what gets people to the theater. But I think you could argue that is the same of like AI generated art or like the things you buy at Home Goods. Not that there's anything wrong with Home Goods, but like that is mass consumption at a theatrical level. And it is our job as collectors, as artists, as people who are patrons of the arts to continue to invest and bring people along and show them that these things are easily accessible. They're right outside your front door. San Francisco and the Bay Area is some of the best regional theater in the country. And that those are things that you can go experience and enjoy by putting your phone away and just buying a ticket and showing up, or going outside of this theater and buying a piece of art on the wall and supporting an artist to continue to invest in their practice and help them continue to create art.
And that reminds me of another thing that I've also been thinking about. I have a number of friends that are, well-known like YouTube people or content producers, what have you. And they are so hyper aware of the algorithm, right? So one of the things we talk about is like with the theater, how is this world of YouTube videos and things like that affecting our attention, our ability to concentrate, what kinds of experience feel pleasurable to us. But also on that side of the creator, the theater director, who's thinking, oh my goodness, I can't do the 4-hour stage play or what have you anymore. And so thinking about like what are the ways in which we as artists or cultural workers, creative practitioners, are, whether we like it or not, incentivized to conform what we do to the logic of like the algorithm, kind of very broadly understood though.
What was the question?
There wasn't really a question. It was just me kind of thinking out loud about the fact that the person eating the spaghetti video is not just affecting the audience; it's affecting the person making that video.
Yeah, and I guess my question on that front then, are we yet in a time, you talked about sort of this intense contrast between what we're consuming in short-form video content on our phones all day long and theater, which is the antithesis of that, live, in-person, human bodies. Are we yet in a time where we're seeing the impact of humanity's addiction to short form content on the arts, the other arts, the ones that are here at FOG. Like, how should we be thinking about that? And are you seeing it impact how artists' work is put out there?
Yeah, that's another big question. Okay, so it is no secret that the last couple of years, like the art world that we're in, has been in a lot of trouble. Like that, there's the funding is being pulled out both on the commercial side and in the nonprofit space, to the point where we're in a real crisis. A lot of institutions shutting down, a lot of people going out of business. And on one hand, there's a lot of things we can blame on that. We can say, oh, well, interest rates went up and that affected things, and already it was a bubble before that. Anyway, there's obviously the geopolitical influences on that, but there's a part of me that intuitively feels like there's some vibe thing going on as well, that our relationship to culture is changing in some kind of way that is potentially quite fundamental. And there's two reactions to that. Like, on one hand, we can kind of like double down on the things that we're best at, like the most conservative parts of the art world. And I see that a lot of people are doing that, but I'm not sure that's very exciting. And so I think that all of this put together I wouldn't say it's put it as a crisis point, but it's sort of prompted a question that I think we collectively might want to think about a little bit harder, which is just like, what do we want this to be?
The thing that keeps popping into my head, and I don't know why, is the Museum of Ice Cream. I feel like
100%.
That was like the turning point of visual kind of environment for performance for social media, which is now kind of throughout the two answers that you
I've had weirdly a lot of conversations this week where people are like
about the Museum of Ice Cream.
Not about the Museum of Ice Cream specifically, but so much as like people asking me, like, why does X museum's exhibition of flat things on walls, why are they doing that? That's so boring. Why don't they learn something from the Museum of Ice Cream or the Museum of Balloons or what have you? And my response being like, well, these are kind of different things, right? And there is a value to this thing, and not everything in culture should be that which like maximally kind of excites you in this kind of Doritos kind of way. On the other hand, I do think that we as like arts professionals should be thinking about that as well, and thinking about, okay, what is it exactly that we're doing? Why are we doing the same thing that we were doing in the 1950s? Yeah.
Before you pipe in, I just want to say too, like, is the measurement of everything then the number of likes or the number of followers, right? Like, that's where that goes to, is that all criticism lends itself to how many likes are you getting? How many views are you getting? And can we measure response?
Can I turn this around actually on you? Because you're in you're broadly in the film industry and in the kind of I don't even know what the name of it is, but entertainment industry, right? Like my brother's a screenwriter, and the way that he thinks about this is very different than the way that I think about it. So I'd just love your insight in that industry, how people are trying to think through that question.
Well, I think, it runs the gamut. So I work for a major talent agency. We have thousands of clients. Their practices span from, actors and actresses to musicians, podcasters, social media influencers, athletes, musicians who are now enjoying this resurgence of live, and what audiences want from them. And what I see is that we have clients who have succeeded without the aid of any machine learning, and who are comfortable with that success and don't need to adapt. And best-selling authors who have a way that they sit down at their desk every time to write a book that doesn't include Gemini or their friend Claude. And who feel as though they will never need to do that. And then we have we are now, I represent creators who their primary paintbrush is AI. So there's such a broad spectrum, and I can't sum it up into one sentence.
Yeah.
What I can say is that it's also deeply impacted by, we have guilds in the entertainment industry, the Writers Guild, the Directors Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, and, the biggest takeaway from all of these conversations that have been happening within these guild negotiations over the past several years has been, how do we ensure that the art of, filmmaking is preserved, and how do we ensure that identity of an actor, actress is something that is protected? And, the big sort of output, and we're going back into negotiations now, so there will be an evolution of this, but when Gen AI kind of confronted these topics in the first place, it was like consent and compensation. And I imagine that both of those things will still be kind of like the underpinning, but I think that we're going to be pushed into this idea of identity. And we're really going to need to understand what is parody and what is just inappropriate usage. So I could go on and on as well, but I think in the entertainment world, actors, actresses, musicians, we're all thinking about this too. And we have a lot of questions. We have fewer answers, but we have a lot of questions about where we're going. Okay, can I turn back to you now, my experts?
That was a very expertful answer.
What does creative agency then look like when systems become more generative, more ubiquitous? These machines kind of have access to all information. Does it distill creativity?
I'll just put it back as the way that you said it. It can mean a million different things. For me, it means being able to explore a much larger technical space much more efficiently to try to build a lot of different iterations of different tools, but I think at the end of the day, I feel like the writer with the typewriter was like, I have this thing that I do. If it can help me do it more efficiently, that's great.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of hardwired to do what I'm going to do anyway.
By the way, that writer who I speak of, whose name I won't mention, actually still writes by hand in a notebook. So he's about as far away as it comes.
I think there's a little bit of both. I think there's this incredible opportunity in front of us of people who may not be trained, as you said, to do certain things. Like, I've never been trained to code. I now know how to vibe code. But someone who may have this incredible idea in their head of a film or a piece of art, and they can sit down and prompt conversational AI to do these things. But I also think on the reverse of that, there's also this ability to say no, to know when to opt out, to know when to push back. I think, as you said earlier with the OpenAI chatbot, it kept forward thinking and pushing you forward, and almost like a people pleaser. I will openly admit, I talk back to Gemini all the time. I literally say, no, I don't think that, or having the ability to critically think and look at what is being fed back at you and go, yes, this makes sense, or no, this does not make sense. And being able to know when to tell the machine no. Yeah. I think what's so interesting about AI in general is this, yes, we're as a San Francisco community, we're early adopters. We are thinking about how we integrate these things into our workflows, both at work and into our everyday life. But sometimes you also need to know when to opt out. You also need to know when to shut the thing down and think critically, or it can help you get 80% of the way there, but the last 20% needs to be human made. It needs to be able to, for you to sit back and say no, I don't like this, or no, this doesn't feel right. And I think we're seeing things start to come out of people just being all in. And I think this is maybe a broad statement, but I think critically, our country and other countries in the world have stopped thinking critically about things, or looking at an image and saying yes, maybe this isn't a real thing, or why am I looking at this, or why am I having this reaction to this thing? And that critical thinking has gone to the wayside.
Okay, so I asked about bright line rules for the industry and what we should be putting in place now to protect our futures, but what do we as individuals then have as our bright line rule? Is it, 80% we should be thinking critically to, how can we kind of carry the message of this conversation out into the worlds in which we inhabit?
I think for me, it's knowing why I'm using the tool and why I'm not using the tool. It's understanding, like, I view Gemini, I sound like a PSA for Google, and I realize that. I use Gemini as an administrative task. Like, I started my career as an EA. If I had Gemini back then, I would be so efficient at my job. And I think for me, it like removes a lot of the administrative burden or the day-to-day of things that, like, at the end of a very long workday, like, I don't want to think about that shit. Like, I can put it into a tool, or I can have a very tangible example of this is, like, I had a bunch of art appointments in LA in the fall. I literally put in the galleries, the appointment slots, where I was staying, and said, I have these 3 blocks of time on these 3 days. Tell me how to do this most efficiently. And Gemini literally spit out a spreadsheet, told me exactly what time to leave for things, when to call my Uber. And then I talked back at it and said, I don't like this. Like, I'd rather do this at this time. Or, like, I know that this gallery director back there and I are going to have a lovely conversation on a couch. So, like, he needs to be last. Therefore, like, I, like, talked back to the model. And I think that's also the thing that isn't happening is, like, you need to talk back. Like, give it feedback. That is what it's there for. Like, it should be, I don't want to say, like, you should be having a conversation with it, but, like, have a conversation with it. Like, know that, like, the answer it gives you is not a final answer. So I think for me, it's, like, looking at how I use it and what I use it for, and what I, like, from an arts perspective, like, I think I gave this example when we had our pre-call, like, a lot of the times I buy art that needs to be framed. It's very convenient for me to put in the art into the tool, tell it exactly how I want it framed, and give me options so that when I go to a framer, I know exactly what I want.
That's fantastic. Okay, I didn't ask you this question before, so I apologize for putting you on the spot, but just know we are coming to you in about 5 minutes, so think of your most critical question for these 2 gentlemen. So at the end of last year, I asked my most commonly used AI, we'll call it Gemini, to roast my year. And, it gave me back a lot of insight into how overworked I am, how much energy went into planning my wedding last year, et cetera, et cetera. So if I asked you to share what your gem might have said to you, or your most commonly used AI might have said to you to roast your 2025, and or if we're sitting here a year from now to roast your 2026, you pick.
I guarantee you I'm roasting myself so much harder than that thing that ever roasted me. I did
Spoken
have
like a true artist,
I did,
yes.
I did upload the book I have coming out in April called How to See Like a Machine. And I was like, roast this. I want the most ruthless critique of anything you can think of. And it started like talking all this trash. And I was like, no, I need a citation because you're saying this thing is this. I don't think it does. And it was funny to be a little bit of a self-check. But these things, they make shit up though too. You know what I mean? And I think that's like another thing like that in terms of how you were talking about how you're using it. You're very much describing a process where you are the pilot and you are turning the autopilot switches, not the autopilot switches turning you. And I think that for me is
I
a
think that's
big
our rule.
takeaway. Exactly.
Continue to sit in the pilot seat.
Yeah.
I actually did ask Gemini to roast me at the end of the year, and I will not share what it said about me. I had a very interesting 2025, so we're not going to talk about that. But I think in terms of 2026, I think that like what Gemini is going to feed back to me about my year is like I spent a lot of time talking to Gemini about my theater company. I am hiring a new executive director for the theater this year, and so a lot of my conversations with the model as of late have been around like do I want to restructure the theater and have only one executive director and have the artistic director report to the executive director and write me a deep research paper on like theaters of a similar size with a similar budget, and like how can I influence that conversation with the board, or like, so there's a lot of that. And then there is honestly like a lot of art stuff. It's a lot of like, how can I like plan things more efficiently? Or like a lot of the times when I live in Chicago, a lot of the times, Jessica Silverman knows this, I like to see my work in person before I buy it. Therefore, I put holds on work all over the country and then make sure my travel aligns on when I can see it. So like when I'm in New York, I'm trying to go from Chelsea to Tribeca to the Lower East Side, sometimes to the Upper East Side on a city bike, because that is how I roll in the city. And how do I do that more efficiently? And like, I could probably spend like 2 hours on a Google map trying to figure that out, or it's like 5 minutes on Gemini. So a lot of it is like, how do I do life more efficiently? So I think as somebody who hosted a roast for his 30th birthday, like, it is truly my love language. So it's nice to have a machine do it for me.
Hopefully this fair is a place where you're visiting some of these items in person and making a final decision.
You know, not at this fair per se, but there are people at this fair who have things on hold for me that I will see when I am at their galleries.
I just saw your eyes dart around the room. So
yeah,
there
I
are
see
several
one in
of you.
particular in the back who has something on hold for me in a basement in New York City.
That's fantastic. I just wanted to comment on one of the things you said, because you asked me about Hollywood. Like, I actually do think that these tools are amazing for things that are not as interesting, like previs, you know, like planning and pitching. They just don't get as much attention in the news because they're not stolen identity, you know, type things.
I also think it's very interesting, and arguably the reason why I'm on this couch is because I think art galleries also have an opportunity to like harness the power of AI to remove some of the administrative burden that they are faced with, and therefore can spend more time investing in artists, going to museums or institutions and putting placements, finding a way to like write pitches to grants or to fellowships that are more impactful, that like can be done in a shorter amount of time.
So are you inviting the audience to come consult you if they need help with that?
I will say that I have started pro bono consulting with art galleries as a means to just get get discounts on art, but as means to like help solve like some of these administrative burden questions. Like I had a conversation last week with a gallery in Chicago that was trying to figure out how to fit a collage into a freight truck. And I was like, why don't you just put the dimensions into Gemini, put the freight truck dimensions into Gemini, and have it sketch it out for you and figure this out for yourself? Or like, I actually sat with an art dealer and said, hey, you want to put this sculpture in this sculpture garden? Like, why don't we take a photo of the sculpture garden, and like literally send it to them so they know exactly how it looks and actually sell the sculpture to this institution. So I think there are like all these ways that AI, like I think to your first question, I think when we think about AI and art, it's always that final JPEG. And the reality is it could be like the best studio assistant that no one has tapped, or the best gallery assistant that no one has tapped, that can allow these galleries to spend so much more time investing in their artists, in selling work, because ultimately you want to get paid so you can continue to create more art. And I think like maybe my like rose-colored glasses view of this all is like, we can harness this power that has come into our lives in a means to like further art and further artists' ability to create art, because we can steward the art forward in a different but incredibly meaningful way.
All right, over to our incredible audience. I see so many people nodding their heads along with us, so I wanted to give you the opportunity to ask a question back here.
Hi. I guess from my point of view, and I live in the Bay Area, and my husband works in tech, specifically Google at some point, and first of the year, there was a huge article in the New York Times about why people hate AI. And I've been reading a lot about this, as we all have, and I think the main thing about it is they feel it's forced on them. It isn't up to us whether we want it. We have no control over the impact it will have on our society. And I know that Mr. Paglen, first of all, I love your work. I've followed you a long time, and I think it's so creative. But speaking to that, these giant tech companies are in this multi-trillion-dollar race to make the perfect AI model, right? And they're using everything but what we think. Now, Google always thinks it has the smartest minds in the room and the PhDs, but in the end, it's this room of people you want to listen to. It's a much wider room. It's our society, and they are not being consulted at all. You have a bunch of PhDs in a room somewhere, and it is very frustrating to us because AI is being thrust on us. Now, I use it all the time. I just planned a trip to Europe, and I told them what I wanted to see, and it is so helpful. The administrative is separate from what's really being planned, right? And if we know what happened with Facebook and with Instagram, and I love Instagram, but it's out of control. I mean, I would give up the convenience of a cell phone if we just go back to being people who talk to each other. And I think this is a moment, and it probably 5 years ago was the moment to say, hey, stop with the fucking AI, and let's talk about it can help us create things meaningful, connect to each other, and not have Claude be your best friend. Claude's not my best friend. He's a helper. My best friends are creative, interesting people who I love to talk to about creative and interesting things.
So more of a comment than a question. Okay, we're moving on to a question. A hand, all the way in the back, yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here today. I was really excited to see where this conversation went because, for context, I'm a public high school teacher. I've worked in high school for about 12 years. I've got a lot of friends who work in lower education. And frankly, I am horrified by what I am seeing. I'm horrified by AI. I'm horrified by Google DeepMind. What I can tell you that I've seen firsthand is a total loss of confidence in kids, that they have no inherent trust in their own knowledge. What I'm noticing is a loss in the ability to dream. And if you cannot dream, you cannot resist or believe in a better future. And I see things like Google DeepMind, which we know works with Google Cloud, which is giving data to Palantir. And so I hear you calling out these unjust murders that are happening. And yet these companies that I hear you kind of advocating for are giving that technology. And I'm deeply disturbed by the advice to think critically when our school system is being inundated by ed tech. And I frankly work with students from East Palo Alto. I work in a very odd school that has some funding, but the funding I'm noticing is going to kids that have parents that work in tech and have the resources to help them moderate their tech at home. But I'm looking at my BIPOC students, I'm looking at my queer students, I'm looking at all the people that I hear you saying you want diverse minds to help train AI to be better. I am seeing them left by the wayside. And I am so frightened. So I am that person you say is frightened and you fear, like you want to get rid of people having fear of AI. And I guess I'm looking at data where I think it's the NIH said 30% of teens would rather use a chatbot as their friend, probably for the same reason of you're getting positive feedback. And 28, I think, % of teens are addicted to AI. So your suggestion to just put the phone down, to live in the moment for theater, you can't tell an alcoholic to just put the drink down. And so I have this deep fear. So as a person who is afraid, who is witnessing what I fear is going to be the most unengaged, apathetic group of kids, and rightfully so, this is not a criticism of them. What keeps you in this industry? What are you seeing other than efficiency, which to me is promoting a capitalistic model of I can work harder, I can be used for more things, and in an age where we're not paying people very much, that frankly is really concerning. What keeps you going? What are you seeing? What am I missing? What are you seeing? Because art to me is one of the last hopes for humanity. And adding AI into it is a corrosion. So please tell me, what are you seeing? What should I not be afraid of?
So I'm going to answer this as art collector Brandon, because I think a lot about this as someone who spends his day at DeepMind. For me, the reason I continue to show up is because, one, I believe ultimately what we are doing is going to bring a greater good to the world. But I think from a very tactile sense, it has allowed me to, one, have a seat at a table that I might not normally have had a seat at as a queer man, to bring my ideas and my lived experience to those types of conversations. And two, as a true patron of the arts, taking the compensation, quite literally, that I am paid and truly funneling it back into the things that are very important to me, like buying and supporting marginalized artists. My collection is like predominantly queer and female artists. I want to support emerging artists who I can tangibly see the impact of purchasing a piece, put back into their creation to continue to create art. And then in the same form, how I can support theater, particularly in Chicago, to support these small, essentially startup theaters by bringing people there, by essentially continuing this type of art stewardship by taking the funds that I get from my day job and funneling those funds into things that are deeply, deeply important to me.
Over here? Oh.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. I think it's really interesting these days in terms of AI intersection in art, and as someone who loves tech and film together, it's really interesting to see the space. I think a lot of people, including myself, sort of expected the art space to be the last space for AI to sort of have a lot of influence and take over, and we've sort of seen the opposite. So my question is, to what extent can we consider AI incorporated art as authentic? I want to ask, what does authenticity mean to you? And where do we sort of draw the line, or how do we define authenticity when it comes to art that is incorporated with AI? I don't think it's purely positive or purely negative. I personally believe that it is almost inevitable to use AI or other emerging tech in our future film or art industry, but using AI tools for editing versus creating an entire film or a music with AI could be considered different in terms of the extent of authenticity. So I wanted to see and hear what your perspective in terms of, to what extent do you think AI incorporated art is authentic?
This was, by the way, one of the questions I was hoping to ask you, so I'm glad that it came up.
Okay, so it's a really good question, a very complicated question, and it's a question that has followed the history of art and has many modulations over the centuries. I can only tell you from my personal experience and just kind of like what my vibe is in the studio, and in terms of the stuff that I come out with, we can use AI to explore mostly technical questions, on the underlying base of things, but I don't want to say as a piece of artwork something that was made by a model that I personally did not make that model, right? In other words, and what I mean by that is that each of these language models, each of the image models almost has like an in-house style that it wants to do. Like OpenAI has a way that it wants to write. Claude has a way that it wants to do code. Midjourney has a way that wants to do images, which is different than Nano Banana. And I don't want those scripts in the art that I make. Now, there can be a part of my process where I'm ingesting a bunch of research papers and trying to understand this thing about how internet technology works or something like that. But you're not going to see that as an audience. So I guess just in my own practice, that's where that line is that if these are research tools that I can use, absolutely. But I'm not ever going to make me a gorilla on the moon with a ham sandwich and print it out and tell you that that's a great piece of art.
Thank you so much, Brandon and Trevor. I think that's the end of our talk today, but We appreciate you being such a wonderful audience. Enjoy Fog. Thank you for being here.
Go buy art.
Go buy art.